All right, folks, I want to welcome our guest to the show. It's A.H. Verge, author of Nightmare in the Woods. Welcome to the show, man.
Hey, thank you very much.
Absolutely. It's my pleasure. I'm glad to have you here. So, I know you had some experiences earlier on in life that led you down the path of writing this book that you never thought you would publish. So, why don't you just take us back to where you were, what you were doing, and what happened to you, man?
Sure. Actually, my first encounter was in 1976 in northern New Jersey. I was 8 years old, and I actually walked into a large, hairy cryptid that we didn't know what it was, and it actually ended up stalking our family for weeks. So I didn't realize it was going to haunt me as long as it did, and I was carrying all of this pent-up fear my entire life. So a close friend of mine said that I should write the whole story down and it'll get the memory out of my mind. So I took him up on it, not knowing my wife was actually going to take my manuscript and have it published. And 6 weeks later, it was a bestseller on Amazon.
Well, tell us a little bit about the experience. What was the experience like for you? I mean, did you were you just in the woods and just walked into this thing? Tell us a little bit of the detail around your sighting.
Sure. In 1976, it was a time where, I mean, you'd go in the woods, you would do ice cream trips with your family, that type of thing. And what ended up happening is that we started seeing large footprints in our garden. My parents found them. And it kind of blossomed. We were coming home from going out to dinner one night, and my mother saw this large, hairy thing with bright yellow eyes above our property on a bank up near the woods. So she saw it run back and forth, and then she saw the eyes tear off to one side. And we kind of joked about it and laughed, saying, it was just kind of goofy. But come to find out the next day, our whole backyard was covered in footprints. And then we started smelling things at night. Our dog would go crazy. We would take long walks in the woods as a family. And all of a sudden, we started coming across other signs, nests that we would find in the woods. And what ended up happening is that my parents ended up calling the authorities when it started getting a little too close for comfort. And they came to our home. I still remember in a white Suburban, along with a police car. These guys had to stay in the house, and they went and they started combing our property. They got plaster casts of footprints. They took part of our fence with them, cut down bushes, took all of that with them, a lot of photographs. And then they said they'd call us back in a few days. So my dad waited a few days and he didn't get a phone call. So he called them at the local police department. They had no idea what we were talking about. We were lucky enough because we actually made a cement cast that we still have today. And it bloomed into the fact where when I was a small child, I walked into it and it was about 5 feet from me. And it was just staring down at me as I was staring up at it. And that changed my entire life.
I can only
Since then, we've
imagine.
had other encounters. My whole family's had encounters. Our last encounter was about 2.5 weeks ago, but it doesn't seem to leave us alone. Some people have said it's because I'm Native American. It seems to hover around me. I don't like it. I hear people that want to have encounters, and I strongly encourage them to go the other way with that, not to get too close to these things. But no, I've had some pretty horrendous encounters. One, in fact, my whole family was in a camper, and our camper was picked up down in Lancaster, Pennsylvania.
Well, let's talk a little bit about that. You used the word stalked, and I want to go back. I certainly want to get into some of your other encounters and some of your more recent encounters, but let's talk about that for a second. I've heard that before from other people that these things follow them home, they have these experiences, and then other things happen to them after this. So you use the word stalked, which is a pretty serious word. You and
Yeah.
I were both in law enforcement, and if you go out on a call and somebody says, "Hey, this person's stalking me," that perks up the ears, right? So let's talk a little bit about that. Why do you use the word stalked, and why do you think this thing is stalking you? Do you think it's the same thing? Do you think it's a different creature? Do you think it's just the phenomenon in and of itself that is lending itself to the stalking. I'm sorry, to the stalking. So just go a little bit more in detail about what that means to you and why you use that word.
Sure. I believe that there's more than one, of course. There has to be. There has to be a viable population for these things to exist. They've existed almost on every continent all through history. So there's a lot of them out there, and they have a long history of it. In our situation, we when it first started with us, when I was a kid, um, it started hovering around our house. And what I believe is, I think in my own mind that this thing just happened to wander by. And once it wandered by, it took interest in us. The footprints that we discovered in our garden, there were two sets. One was 18 inches long, and the other one was approximately 12 and a half inches long. So we believed it was probably an adult female and a juvenile. The juvenile prints were roughly 3 inches deep. So we're guessing it would have to have been at least close to 400 pounds. So that's a pretty big primate to be walking around. Excuse me. We encountered more incidences that started happening where it was coming closer and closer to our home. It bothered me a lot, and we suppressed the whole idea because, let's face it, nobody wants to talk about those things, especially back then. You'd be laughed at. After I wrote the book, I started getting more and more people coming forward from the same area and telling me of their encounters that they were holding back because they didn't want anybody to laugh at them. So I realized there's a huge community of people out there. Well, we moved to Pennsylvania from New Jersey. Okay, I didn't want to be in New Jersey anymore. I figured I'm gonna come out here. It's quieter. We had 43 acres, beautiful home. We started hearing things around our house. 2.5 weeks ago, I have a barn, a metal barn, and whenever these things come around, you can almost sense it because all wildlife disappears. You don't hear crickets or tree frogs or anything. And even though it's cold right now, you hear birds and things like that. And you see deer walking around at night. There was nothing. And then I heard two slaps on the side of my barn when I was standing out with my dog. The minute that happened, my dog, which is usually not afraid of anything, starts pulling for the house. She doesn't want to be outside anymore. About 2.5 years ago, we had an incident happen. Actually, I have a picture if you'd like to see it. We were traveling home from dinner on a long stretch of road in Pennsylvania, Route 209. And my wife, it was my wife, my two children, and one of the family friends all started yelling for me to stop because there was something in the field. When we looked back, I saw this creature running back and forth in the field until I honked my horn. And then it stopped, stood totally still like a tree. And the only thing it did was move slowly down and picked up a rock. And it stood there and watched us for 15 minutes. So if you'd like, I'll show you the picture I have of that.
Yeah, absolutely.
And if you can see right in the middle, it's doing some type of a crazy dance. I took this and I went, because I was originally at one point affiliated, like you said, with law enforcement, and I did things with the government. I took it to a friend of mine that's a government anthropologist, and he looked at it and he said, with the vegetation growth, the time of year, and the hand to knee ratio, he said, you're looking at something that's 7.5 feet tall. And he said, there's no reason for this to be where it is. He goes, I'm looking at an orangutan that's deformed. And so I asked him point blank, I said, what is it? And he told me, he goes, I have no clue. And he said, if you want to go check with the rangers, local rangers, they might have more insight on it. When I spoke to the local rangers, they were telling me that this is something that's very common to see, that this happens quite a bit. And of course, I had to introduce myself with my background and everything, and they opened up a little bit more. But yeah, they were very familiar with the whole situation. Now, when after I wrote the book, things started to explode. I never wanted to write this book. I never wanted to have anything to do with Bigfoot or Sasquatch. I'll be the first to tell you, it terrifies me. Okay. And since then I've gone on expeditions. I've done lectures. I wanted nothing to do with this. I just wanted to get rid of the memory. It's 5,000% worse now because now I'm involved in everything. And in some ways, it's actually helped me because it's helped me deal with it and get it past where I was. But when I started doing investigations, because I was doing a lot of investigations, I started seeing signs that most people don't see. And once you start seeing these signs, they stand out. I would hear calls in the woods, tree knocks, um, you name it. Then I start seeing signs where there was physical signs put up. And I have pictures of that as well, if you'd like to see them. Um, if you look here, that's one of the trees I got out in the woods, not too far away from me. When you start seeing trees twisted around other trees, there's a problem. And then I was walking through, and right along the side of the highway, there's a nest. That's the opening for that was about 4.5 feet high. The whole thing was almost 7 feet tall, and it was about 12 feet long. That was 25 feet off the road, and nobody knew it was there. So you start seeing these things and you start understanding what you're looking at. Now, everywhere I go, I can spot these things a mile away. Trees, small saplings that all the trees are broken and pointing in the same direction for approximately a mile. Okay, these things all start to stand out. I've been asked to do Bigfoot excursions to because certain groups felt that I could bring it in. I don't want to bring it in. I'd be bait. There's no reason to be bait. It doesn't end well for the bait. So I most of the times I kind of shy away from it. But now it's developed even more since the first book. I'm actually going to start writing the second book on the whole thing, on just signs and what to look for, because people are oblivious. They don't know what's in their backyard. And I mean, just once you get the idea of what the signs are, things like smells. I mean, the odor this thing emits is horrendous. But
It's interesting
in
you talk
fact,
about. I
what's
was
that?
I say it's interesting you talk a little bit about the smell because it's weird to me that when I first started getting into the subject back in the day, a lot of people would talk about smells and that they smell, but in fact, the majority of the people that I interview say there was no smell at all. It's maybe 15 to 20% of the time. So when you talk about the smell, is that something that you and the people that you're talking to are getting the majority of the time? And if so, what's the description for the audience as far as what the smell is like?
The smell is a combination of sulfur and if you were nose down in a rotting deer carcass. It's absolutely vile. Um, and it's funny because the majority of the people that I've taken out on expeditions have never had an incident themselves. They're so starved to get that first encounter. And usually after they tell me that, it's like, okay, you know what? I'll take you to show you some signs. I'll show you some of the bedding areas because I've seen a lot of that. I've seen makeshift structures in the woods deep that have no business to be there. But I do not take them where they're going to have any encounter. There's no way. I don't want to see this again. I've had 5 incidences so far. And one of my greatest accomplishments was when my family had an occurrence. So that way they knew I wasn't absolutely crazy. Because up to that point, it was, yeah.
Yeah, I can
As a
imagine.
matter of fact, it's funny. We watched The Legend of Boggy Creek. My kids, before they had their encounter, I told them this is a terrifying movie. When that hand comes through the window, I understand if you want to jump in Dad's lap here because you're going to be scared. When it came on, my youngest one at the time was 7. She goes, "Are you kidding, Dad? You can see the zipper on the suit." And I felt like an idiot. But after they had their own encounter, that finished it. My wife, myself, and my oldest one all carry. And I don't go in the woods unless I'm carrying.
Yeah, I don't think that's a bad idea at all. And I certainly I keep teasing him. We're going to get back to the encounters, but I want to go back to the pictures you showed me about the tree structures and the trees that were bent around other trees and
Yes.
what looked like a nest. I've had so many conversations with people about, I just did an interview recently that'll be out here in a couple of weeks. I talked to a guy recently who has a nest site very similar to what they're seeing with the Olympic project. And I've had Shane Corson on, and we talked about those nests before. And I'm very curious, what do you make of, or what do you think about these tree structures and why they're doing what they're doing? We're assuming that it's a Sasquatch that's doing this. It's
Mhm.
either one of those two things. It's either done by human beings or it's something else with thumbs, which would lend itself to being in North America, particularly. It's got to be a
Yes.
Sasquatch, right? There's nothing else. So
Yeah.
I guess my long-winded question for you is, A, what do you think about the nest, and what you think those are they serving the purpose that we would think of a nest? And what about the tree structures and bending those trees around other trees? What do you think that signifies, or why, in your opinion, what are they doing when they're doing those things?
As far as the signaling with the tree structures, that is a definitive marker for showing where they habit or inhabit and where we should be. That's a no trespassing sign. I've found that a lot of the structures and occurrences I've found are usually behind where trees are broken off. So if trees are pointing, say, to the right, and I walk into the left, I start finding more nests, I start finding more structures. And there's a common tie with all of the sightings I've ever had. It's either you're very close to a power line or you're very close to a gas line. It's a natural highway path that goes right to the forest, and it's a huge game trail. As far as the nests go, I believe that's nothing more than concealment and cover. That's just so they can hide. Now, the nest that I showed you a moment ago, after we saw it, about a month and a half later, it was totally gone. It was dismantled and it was spread all over the woods. So it's more or less to keep them secretive. Um, and I know, I mean, I've been asked so many times the same questions. If they're real, how come you don't find a body in the woods? And I say the same thing. How many bears do you find dead in the woods? And they kind of look at me. I said, okay, I'm going to give you one more stretch. How many humans do you find dead in the woods? And that kind of changes the whole game at that point.
Yeah, that's a whole nother rabbit hole that I've been down so many times with so many people on the show. So let's get back to your original sighting when you were, what'd you say, 5 years old or six or whenever that
eight,
was.
8 years old.
8 years old. Okay.
Mhm.
So you had the sighting when you were eight, and then I'm very curious about the people that showed up afterwards. I think you said it was maybe a sheriff's deputy and then this other SUV. Let's talk a little bit about in detail what you saw during that, and then let's fast forward into this response that you guys got. And what do you think, especially with your law enforcement background, who do you
Mhm.
think that was that showed up and took the stuff away from the house? Do you think it was somebody in maybe a government position outside of just the local sheriff's department? So if you'd walk us down that, I would really appreciate it.
When we started having our encounters in 76, it was becoming tighter and tighter as far as how far we could venture away from the house. Um, it was to the point where we would be on our back deck at night, and we lived on the back deck. I mean, we played Monopoly, we had dinners out there. Um, the encounters started getting closer and closer to the house, where we started watching the dogs. We had a small Chinese pug, and we started watching the dog's reaction. And when the dog started like getting antsy or trying to go in the house, it was time for everybody to go in. Once the encounter started with footprints outside of our house, like right along the wall. And also, I had one encounter where I was on the deck. We were watching meteors. There was a meteor shower one night. And about 4 feet behind me, I could hear something breathing in our hedge. And and then the dog went absolutely wild. Um, that's when my father, in my retrospect, literally saved my life, because he grabbed me and pulled me to him, and then we all ran in the house. Uh, we thought we were all a little crazy. We thought it was somebody stalking us. And it wasn't until we got vindication later a few weeks later, we started seeing news reports where they were having other sightings in the next county. And then it started to diminish where we were, and we realized it was moving on. So they're they're very, how can I, they're not, as far as, they don't settle in one area and stay there. They're constantly traveling. They travel with the game, they travel with the weather, with the seasons. I have very rarely ever seen anything in the winter, but in the springtime, like right now, it's open. We travel on highways now and we're watching constantly. But anyway, we get back to what you're saying. After we had our encounters, because we had about 15 encounters within a few weeks, and it just kept getting more and more brazen. It was getting closer to the house. My father was concerned, where he thought if there was a mother and a child, would it be like a bear and a cub, as far as ripping you apart. There was an incident where my mother was in our garden up by the woods, and I was protecting her with a cap gun, trying to help mom. And the smells started, and then rocks started being hurled over to us. And they would land about 5-6 feet away from us, and then one landed right next to us. This rock was about 25 pounds. So then it kind of really got my attention. At that point, my mother started leaning to start going to the house. My father wasn't home. He was working along with my older brother. And it hit me afterwards. What happens if that was a large male, saw my mother there, has a female, and it was time to get out of the garden? My mother ran down to the house. She was hysterical. When my father got home, he told her, and that's when they called the authorities, because then it was past the point. As far as who showed up, well, I can't say definitively who it was. There was a lot of suits. There was, in the Suburban, there were 5 guys. They took pictures. They cut down our hedge, and they took part of the hedge, not the whole thing. It was like a giant bush up by the edge of the woods. They took down a section of wire fencing. It was about 3 feet long, and they put that in a garbage bag, and it had hair hanging on the edge of the fencing. They probably plastered about a dozen footprints. And then when they were done, they tamped them all out with a big iron slab. So they got rid of everything. Like I said, they didn't know that we had already made a plaster cast out of cement a couple days earlier. So we had an original, which I still have. But who they were, I honestly believe they're somebody with the government. They didn't want this to go out any further. And when we called the police literally had no idea what we were talking about or who we were. So, and we had friends in the police department back then. So it was odd.
Yeah, I definitely find that odd. And I've had conversations with people numerous times on the show about what the government knows and doesn't know about these things. And you'll kind of understand this, obviously, from your law enforcement background. I worked for
Yeah.
the City of Atlanta Police Department, which is a fairly decent size metropolitan area and police department. There's about 2,000 of us on the force when I was there. And you would be surprised what we didn't know
Yeah.
just in that bubble, right? And then when you expand out into the federal government size, there's so many moving parts and things going on. And I think, plenty of people can look at politics today and say, well, I understand there's a lot that they don't know. And my argument for this big conspiracy theory about them covering up aliens and Bigfoot and those kind of things is I don't think they know themselves. And I think situations like this where they come out and collect evidence and things like that, sure, somebody knows something because they're taking the evidence from your house and destroying what's left behind so nobody else can use it. So I do think there's a little bit of that, but this grand conspiracy theory, I'm just not so sure about. I mean,
Mhm.
you went through that scenario when you were a child. I mean, what do you think about this vast conspiracy theory? Do you think it exists, or you think it's more localized?
I kind of agree with you as far as they don't know what it is. They don't know what to make of it. Um, I have been asked on numerous occasions what I think Bigfoot is. And now you have to understand my background. I'm not only a retired police officer, but I'm also a ordained minister. So, I mean, I'm looking at everything from every angle. I believe that there is no missing link that's ever been found. Um, when we have beliefs of where heaven is, not to get theological and everything, but heaven's always up. Okay. I do have a belief that we're not basically made for existence on earth because we're born hairless, we're totally helpless. We're the only creature that has no defense whatsoever except for our mind. I mean, let's face it, we can't kill a dog with our bare hands. It'd be difficult. We could, but a pack, it's not going to happen. Um, I've kind of tended to lend credence to possibly Bigfoot is actually what a human being is supposed to look like. If that's the case, it interbred with something else that that's why we have no missing link. There's no connection between primate and man. So I believe it is divine intervention, of course, but I believe that another type of a human or humanoid bred with a Bigfoot, and it's what we see in the mirror every morning, which is kind of scary. A whole different avenue. I'm sure you've never had that one before.
I've had some similar things for sure. We've
Have
talked
you?
about the Nephilim on the show and other theories about. And I know a lot of shows ask people that. I've asked maybe a handful of people out of the 130 plus shows that I've done and interviews I've conducted what Bigfoot is because I think it's just a subjective thing, you know, and it's there's so much more to it, and that's kind of why I was asking you about the stalking thing in the beginning because a lot of
Yeah.
people feel like they have this ability to connect with people, and there's this tel- telepathic connection that happens on occasion, and then even more the woo part of Bigfoot happens, and then you go down the interdimensional road, and these other things that there's so many rabbit holes to go down. But I'm always curious to talk to people who have had some experience like you have on multiple occasions that have seen different behaviors and things like that. So we've kind of been all over the place. My audience is going to send me emails, I'm sure, but
I'm
we've
sorry.
well, no, it's good. It's good. I enjoy this. Sometimes they're like, "Well, you got to tell them where to go in the interview," and I'm like, "Well, I want it to go wherever it goes." But let's go back to your experiences. You've
Okay.
talked about multiple experiences that you and your family were having. Sort of take us down that road and tell us in detail as much as you can what you were experiencing, what you guys were seeing and hearing and experiencing when you were having these interactions with these creatures.
Okay. Well, as far as the experience when I was a child, we've pretty much gone over that. The next biggest one was we decided to homeschool our kids. We pulled them out of school and we would go on different trips, like day trips. We would do a hands-on experience instead of in a book. And we decided to go to a park one day, and everybody was at school and at work, and we were the only ones in the park. So we went to a park and we decided it was a picnic type of situation. We decided to take a walk down one of the trails. So we're walking down one of the trails, and all of a sudden, we got this overwhelming smell. And the minute I got it, it froze me. Um, I kind of kept my eyes peeled to see if there was anything around. I didn't see anything. And unfortunately, I ended up having to take a moment by myself behind a bush, you might say. Okay. I had to do a guy thing. So all of a sudden, while I am peeled off from everybody else and I'm taking care of business, all of a sudden there was an explosion of bushes and grass being thrown in the air and grunting and howling. And my family came running to me. I ran out from behind the bushes and we started making our way up the hill. And then we started following whatever it was. It was coming through the bushes and it was paralleling us. Every time we would stop, it would stop. And it was getting louder. And the only that reminded me of it was we were watching a Animal Planet show about silverback gorillas. And it had the same type of behavior, shaking bushes, small trees. And then we caught a glimpse of like a dark shadow in the bushes. And it looked like a gorilla. Well, as we're trying to get out of the area, we had to go up a hill. all of a sudden the utility truck started coming down that was working in the area. And he saw us and he saw we were pretty shaken up. He pulled over and he wanted to know if everything was all right. And I told him that there's something in the bushes down below. And he worked in that area. He looked at down toward the bushes and he could see something moving. And he goes, all right. He goes, you guys get back to your car. I'll take care of this. And he leaned over in his glove compartment and took out a 38. So then that's when I realized, okay, they have a knowledge of this. They've had sightings of this already. So we got out of there. My family was a little shaken up, and that's when they started believing a little bit more and understood why Dad doesn't like going in the woods by himself, why I don't like going on walks at night out in the woods. It doesn't happen anymore. Next big occurrence is we were on vacation in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, and we were staying with the Amish in a pop-up camper. And I'm a big guy. I was staying in one end of the camper. My wife and kids were in the middle and on the other end. And we're the only ones in the campground. And all of a sudden, our entire camper on one end got picked up and slammed down 3 times. I grabbed my revolver and I'm looking outside and there's the smell again. So I didn't know what to make of it. I kind of had an idea. My daughter immediately grabbed her phone and started Googling. And she showed me, she goes, Dad, you know, this is a huge Bigfoot area. And I'm standing out and I'm watching around outside to see if there's anything out there. And then all of a sudden I happen to notice the power lines. And we were camping about maybe 30 yards away from the power line stretch. So there was that one. The next biggest one we had was on the Route 209 with the pictures. And we watched that for about 15, 20 minutes. And it would run back and forth. And the way it was waving its arms and kind of going crazy, I was told that's possibly a mating ritual type thing, like for to attract a mate, because that's the same thing that primates will do. Then there's the barn incident with slapping the barn. We had an incident. I live on a lake and we own an island in the lake, and most of the cove belongs to us. Well, we were out by our campfire one night, so we have bonfires in the summertime. We were entertaining some family and friends, and all of a sudden all the crickets stopped. All the peepers stopped peeping. No more deer, and you'd see that constantly. And then the smell started again, and the whole group that was here watched something very heavy and large making their way around the cove toward us through the bushes, where it just kept moving bushes and trees as it kept going. Right after that, we decided, hey, well, let's take the party inside. There's no reason to stay outside anymore. So we all went inside, and one by one, I had to walk everybody out to their cars that night while I had an automatic. And they were very appreciative of that. Well, the last person I went out to his car with him, the smell came back even worse. And that's when he announced to me, he goes, hey, do you know there's a bear about 20 feet away from us right now, hunched down in the edge of the bushes? And I looked past his truck and it looked like a bear on all 4, almost like in a ball on the ground. And the smell was unbearable. And as soon as he left, that bear started to stand up. And that's when it was time to get back in the house. I don't know why these things seem to gravitate toward myself and my family. It scares me. More so than it probably should. With all the training I've had, this stuff shouldn't scare me, but it does. You mentioned about telepathy. I had an occurrence that happened years ago where we started experiencing things in our house. And since that time, I seem to have a keen knowledge of things that happen around me. And everyone I've spoken to, because I've gone to a lot of people about it, I actually even got tested by a group from the Edgar Cayce Institute. And they said that it blew the charts away with the stuff I was doing. I don't know. I've never had a whole lot of thought either way on the stuff, but they believe that that's possibly why stuff keeps coming toward me. I wish it would stop. I don't want this stuff around me anymore. It really affects me quite a bit. I still do investigations because in a way, I figure if I prove this thing that it exists, it's going to put this thing to bed once and for all.
Yeah, and I think that's the answer we're all trying to seek, right? And
Hmm.
have you had other strange experiences outside of Bigfoot in or around your property throughout the years, or has it all been related to Bigfoot? I like to ask that
No, we've
because a lot of people have lights and other things that they see, when these things are really close around. So,
we've had lights. It's strange because we have a lot of activity in houses we move to. If you understand what I mean, we have a lot of activity that takes place, and that's one reason I ended up becoming ordained because I guess you might say it's a form of protection, and I'm trying every avenue I can to watch myself and my family. So we have had some strange occurrences. A lot of electrical occurrences take place, um, especially when there's no one else around. That's when we see the majority of things. And where we live, it's most likely, or I'm sorry, it's mostly a vacation community. I mean, we have 43 acres here, and there's a lot of vacation homes in the area. So we're here pretty much secluded most of the time. But it's nothing I really want to ever have to see again.
yeah, I can definitely imagine. I know that stuff can be tough for sure. So, what do you think it's going to take to prove that these things are real? Do you think it's going to take a body? Do you think there's some other way that we can do it? Because we clearly have pictures, we have video, we have audio, we have the castings from the footprints and things like that. Other physical evidence, trace evidence left behind. What do you think it's going to take to prove that these things are real? Do you think somebody's going to have to shoot one and drag it in and say, "Here you go, world," or is there another way to do it?
Unfortunately, I don't think it'll ever be proven. I think that even with a body, you're still going to have the skeptics. I do believe that if mankind crosses that line, there's no coming back. And if all of these things decide to become angry at once, we're done. I honestly believe that. When you look at the various occurrences, the Almost, Yeti, Loop Guru, the Meesing, I mean Skunk Ape, they're on every continent. Monkey Man in China, Orang Pendek, they're everywhere. Even places you wouldn't believe they would be, they're there. And they can hide from us. They're the most elusive creature I've ever seen. I'm a hunter, I'm a fisherman. I'm in the woods a lot when I go hunting, but I always hunt with a group, and I always carry a backup everywhere I go because I don't trust it. Um, as far as what's it going to take, leave it alone. I hate to say it, leave it alone, because once you cross that door, and this is a mean critter that can come after you. I believe there was a child in Colorado that was abducted back in the, I think 67, 69, and never seen again. But they did see what looked like a bear with a bolt of fabric over its shoulder running through the woods on two legs. So it's a dangerous situation. I'm good friends with a gentleman out in Whitehall, New York called Brian Goslin. He's a police officer that had the occurrence in, oh my gosh, it's in New York State, Whitehall, New York. And he told me the same thing. He said, people don't realize what they're messing with. This is a big critter. And I hate to see somebody else end up in a bad way.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think there's been plenty of things that have happened throughout history. Ape Canyon comes to mind. Some of the other stories
Yes.
that people talk about. The Beast of El Biel, I don't know what to make of that. But I think these things have actually killed people, and I think that there's disappearances that could probably be attributed to these things, maybe even other cryptids. But I'm curious for you, and this is the part I have a hard time wrapping my brain around when I'm continuously diving into this subject is I can understand maybe in 1932 or 1902 or even, in the 60s, these things being able to elude us, right?
Hmm.
It's 2022 and we have drones and we have all of these things that now true enough there's not a ton of people out there looking. I mean there's a vast majority of the people that are in the community that actually go out and research and try to find these things in different states throughout the continental United States and even around the world. But why is it, or how is it, do you think they're continuously able to avoid detection outside of the few things that we have, like the Patterson Gimlin film, some of the
Hmm.
controversial Tide Standing stuff that Tide's put out, and other people that have captured these things on thermal and whatnot. But in general, why do you think it is, or how do you think it is, that they're still able to elude us to this very moment?
When I mentioned earlier about possibly this is the first human being or the true human being that's on Earth, and they bred with something else that would be fast more superior than us, maybe they were given technology to help them stay elusive. There are a lot of things in this world we don't understand, we never will understand. That's what keeps the mystery alive and keeps it interesting. Um, when you think of things like, for instance, the gorilla wasn't discovered until the early part of the 20th century. Okay. And they're coming up with new variations of creatures every day. Spiders are being discovered in the rainforest that have never even been heard of before. And then when you think of what's in the ocean, nobody really knows. Okay. There's some real mysteries out there. The one thing about man is arrogant. We think we're the top of the food chain. We think we already know everything. We're the smartest creature on earth. But now they're starting to realize dolphins actually might be smarter than us. There are some creatures out there that could be a lot smarter than us. I recently discovered that most creatures can see, I guess it's ultraviolet. We can't see that. So when we walk out in the woods, we need a light to see. Everything else can look and see you walking through like it's daytime. But we're arrogant. We believe we already have everything. We have all the technology. We have all the intelligence to be the top line. We're not. First thing you learn about being smart is when you realize you're the dumbest one there.
Yeah, I tend to agree, man. Well, I appreciate you coming on, AH, and sharing your encounters and your stories. The book is called Nightmare in the Woods. What's the second book going to be about?
Well, the first one was Nightmare in the Woods here. The second one, actually, I wrote another book. It was called The Little Englishman. That's going to be coming out very soon. We're republishing that. I own a tea company called Go Tea, and it's a kind of interesting story. I'm Native American, and it's our Native American recipes that have been handed down, and it's the story of how we got them. And one of our teas has actually been investigated because it seems to be reversing type 2 diabetes. So we have some medicinal teas, and I ask everybody to check us out on the web at tegotea.com, TEGOTEA. And the second book was about that. The next one's going to be, I'm in the process of writing a book about hauntings, about things that have taken place in my family, because every family has a story. You just got to write them down so other people know about it. And then after that, I'm going to get back on Bigfoot because I have so much more evidence, so many more pictures of things that I've discovered. Um, and I'd like to bring that out in the next book.
Sounds awesome. AH Verge, Nightmare in the Woods. I'll link to everything in the show notes for this show. You guys go check it out. Thanks so much for coming on, man. I had a blast talking to you.
Me too. Thank you very much.
All right. That was awesome, man.
Everything sound okay?
Oh, yeah. Your sound was perfect. I sometimes have issues with Zoom every once in a while when people's internet drops in and out. I think yours was absolutely